So welcome to everybody. On behalf of the three organizations that co-host this event, that is the ICLD, the East-West Center, and International IDEA, I welcome to this event that is the launch of two important publications that are the result of a project that lasted various years and in fact integrate different perspectives on local governance. From our perspective in particular, these pieces of work are quite relevant to the debates that are taking place at the UN. And for my organization, International IDEA, which I represent as a permanent observer to the UN, this is particularly interesting in terms of the democratic governance implications and dimensions of, especially of the post-2015 development agenda. My name is Massimo Tommasoli, and I'm just giving you some welcoming remarks, and then I will hand over to the other speakers. In particular, we will have Jerker Statin, Acting Secretary General and chairperson of the ICLD, who will make also some introductory remarks, and then we will have the two presenters on behalf of the other authors and editors of the books, and in particular we will have Professor Joachim Oyendal, Professor of Peace and Development Research at the Gothenburg University in Sweden, and my good friend and mentor, in a way, Shabir Chima, who is director of the Asia-Pacific Governance and Democracy Initiative and senior fellow at the research program at the East-West Center in Honolulu. And he has also a long and distinguished career in the UN, namely at UNDP, where he started basically the bulk of work on democratic governance, and subsequently at DESA, where together with Guido Bertucci, who is also in the room, he spearheaded, I think, all the initiatives on governance and reinventing government, the forum on reinventing government that took place over many years in UN with the leadership of UN DESA. So just a couple of words for introducing these and placing this conversation in the UN context. The dimension of local governance and development has long been considered in the rhetoric of development planners as a priority. But sometimes important implications of these dimensions have been lost in the rhetoric. The one is individual, very important dimension, I would say, is the one of proximity. What you see happening in your local context is really what you experience more directly in terms of development. More recently, I would say over the last 2 decades, another dimension in addition to proximity has been added, and it has shown also the impact on the life and not only the perceptions of people. And that is the dimension of connectivity. So we have here the two elements that you see replicated on a larger scale also in the policy debates at the UN. I was mentioning post-2015 development agenda and the debate. There is a lot of discussion, as you all know, about the new goals following the Millennium Development Goals. The new framework is the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. That is a platform that will be further developed in the next months, 10 months, here in this building, in order to produce an agenda development agenda on post-2015. In the Sustainable Development Goals, you can see resonating, let's say, the two elements that I mentioned before. There are some specific references to local governance and local development at the local level, especially with reference to the development of cities, urbanizations, but of course there are implications also in the Sustainable Development Goal number 16 that deals with, among other things, also accountable, transparent, and responsive institutions at all levels, as they say. This implies, of course, the local level. But at the same time, in these conversations, you have an interplay between the local and the global. And you have responsibilities of governments at the national and also the subnational level. But you have, in the debate at the UN, an important group of countries that highlights also the relevance of global dynamics and how do they impact in very specific contexts at the local level. So we have to consider always this tension between the two very distant but still coexisting dimensions that I mentioned before, proximity and connectivity, that bring about development at the local level. For us at International IDEA, there is also another aspect, and that is my last remark. The new agenda will have also an important challenge, will face an important challenge, which is the challenge of implementation. There is a goal on means of implementation in the Sustainable Development Goals framework. A lot of emphasis in this goal has been placed, rightly, I think, on the issue of resource mobilization. There will be a process on resource mobilization, financing for development, and there are implications also for mobilizing and distributing resources at the subnational level. Now, what is important for us is that there is also an implication in terms of how the new agenda will be translated into plans at the national and subnational level, how they will be monitored and assessed, and how citizens will have a voice in all this process. That is what we refer to as the democratic accountability dimension in the implementation of the new framework. For that, IDEA has developed assessment tools that are citizens-led at the national, subnational level. These assessment tools are about the quality of democracy at the national and subnational level, even at the local democracy level. And we have given these tools to the international community as perhaps a mechanism that can be tested, and has been already tested in various cases, as an opportunity, let's say, for countries to take advantage of these knowledge, of this methodology, and also to learn from each other, including in a south-north and south-south perspective. I'm saying south-north because there are certain experiences in the global south that are very relevant also for the development of the countries in the north, which is a very important element of the new SDG framework, because we are talking about goals that are not only for developing countries. These are global goals that have a universal relevance for all countries in the world, irrespective of their development levels. So this is my last comment, and I really thank you for coming here. I'm looking forward to a very engaging conversation, and I have now the honor to give the floor to my colleague and friend who is opening this, in fact, opening with more reference to this specific process that led to these two very interesting publications, who is Jurgen Statin, Acting Secretary General and Chairperson of the ICLD. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and good morning to you all. It is a great pleasure to be here in New York and at this book launch. where we, and I too hope we will have a fruitful discussion later on. As was said, my name is Jerker Statin, and I'm the chairperson of ICLD, but also for the moment the acting Secretary General. I too would like to wish you welcome. But I will also start by thanking Mr. Tomazzoli for hosting this, or making it happen actually in terms of practical terms, that we are able to be here in this building, and that we had the opportunity to invite a lot more than we had expected from the beginning. The importance of relevant literature accessible to the development practitioners cannot really be overstated. In the international development debate, issues regarding local governance and local development are, to put it mildly, not prominent. I would claim that these two books that we are going to hear a little bit more about are as important to the research communities and to the development as they are to development practitioners. And their relevance, they stem from an ambition of identifying what works where and under which conditions. So by engaging scholars from various disciplines and from various countries, these two volumes are unique contributions in the field of local democratic governance. Another distinguishing feature is that the two volumes are the result of two workshops, one organized by the ICLD at the island of Gotland, and the other one organized in cooperation between ICLD and the East-West Center in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And the dialogues we wish to engage you within here today are the starting point for these two volumes, you could say. And the key message, in my opinion anyway, is that these volumes, they conclude that the local development and local democracy, despite all challenges, and many challenges, have a huge potential. The volumes also show that the field is full of unfulfilled promises, some of which are to be remedied through the perspectives revealed in these books. In other words, you have to read them to find out. Ladies and gentlemen, one thing I would like to stress, I have several capacities, and one is also that I'm the Director of International Affairs at the Swedish Association of Local Governments and Regions. And I know we usually convey, and many others with me, that we believe that there is an untapped resource base that should be put forward. And certainly in the context that you were mentioning, Mr. Tomazzoli, the local government practitioners, or the local governments as key players in achieving what we are, the coming sustainable development goals. Or if you look back and look at the Millennium Goals, I think in my country, 8 or even 7 of the goals are provided by local governments. So we expect them to deliver. It's even taken for granted that service deliveries, for instance, are done. And at home, it is the local governments almost all the time. And since we are here in the building, I remember that Kofi Annan, he very often pointed out this particular fact. Sometimes in the overall and in these big global discussions, this part is sometimes forgotten, I think. So that is another way into why we wanted to do this book launch at this particular time. So with that, I would express once again my sincere thanks to the hosts of this meeting, and I'm really looking forward to hear your input after we've heard some other speakers here. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Jerker. Which reminds me that I forgot to mention another tool that we have. This is recently published and it's available on the website of IDEA. As you can see, I don't have it in print. I just have a printout from my office. And that is a democratic accountability in service delivery tool. Actually, it highlights really what you just said, Jerker, that when we are talking about plans on a large scale, then we tend to underestimate the fact that the delivery, the burden of delivery is really on the local levels, on the local governments. And there are issues of capacities, but even more conceptually speaking, I would say approaches that I think now our next speaker will address by introducing the first book entitled The Imperative of Good Local Governance, Challenges for the Next Decade of Decentralization. So, Professor Ojendahl, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everybody. As mentioned, I'm Joachim Ojendahl, professor at Department of Peace and Development Studies at Göteborg University. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. This is the book, you got it out there, and I can actually send around one copy so you see that it actually exists. First of all, I want to offer a few thanks. First of all, to my co-editor of this book, Anki Delnes, who worked with ICLD before, has now moved on to work with UNDP with exactly these issues in Myanmar. She couldn't be here today, unfortunately, but I was really happy to work with her and in order to put together this volume. I also would like to thank ICLD for supporting this project from the beginning to the very end, from the workshop to the actual publication. Swedish SIDA has financed a part for those who have been working with the book and contribute to the book. UNU, United Nations University Press, has been doing a fantastic job of layout and publishing. We thank very much to IDEA here in New York for hosting us and arranging this event. And of course, also a big thanks goes to East West Center and specifically Shabishima for facilitating and kind of making life much more easy, if you like, in the production of this volume. So thanks to everybody. Okay, the origin of this volume was, as you heard already, a workshop at Scotland where ICLD is housed, where we gathered a big chunk of the most well-known and the most published researchers in the world, actually, on these issues. And to our great surprise at the time, everybody seemed keen to come. I'm not sure if it was the beauty of the island itself or what it was, but lots of people were actually attending this workshop. So we had a good start for doing this book. Okay, getting into the substance of the matter. Why is decentralization and local democracy important? Well, at bottom, I think I can talk for all of us who have been involved in this project, that we believe that decentralization and the crafting of local government and local governance is central in the contemporary world. And we believe that for a number of reasons. Sometimes I hear from my colleagues that this is a boring issue. And I try to say nothing could be more wrong than that. Decentralization is a power-induced issue. It's actually transferring of power from a certain level to another level, from some people to other people, from some institutions to other institutions. And I think that's about the most exciting you can do as a social scientist, to study the change or the move of power. Using big words, I would say that the wave of decentralization we've seen for especially the last 2 decades is only second to the third wave of democratization, being the largest transfer of political power that we've seen in the global system since the Cold War era. It's historically seen a massive shift of power from central to more local level. It is, as Tim Campbell once put it, the quiet revolution of our time. And in a sense, perhaps more emphasis on the quiet, because it doesn't make a lot of noise. It's not as visible as more bigger political issues are. As you may know, for 2 decades or longer even, almost in every country around the world, there is some kind of decentralization process going on. And they look, of course, very different, but they have, most of them have their roots in the idea of decentralizing power to more local arenas. It is also, as I sometimes have to argue with colleagues and practitioners in the system, it's not, as I see it, as we see it, a development fad. It's not just a trend. It's not just a fashionable concept that comes one year and disappears next. To me, it happens for a reason, and that the reason is that at the bottom, this is an effect of globalization. It is not anymore enough for government to base its legitimacy on having a distant central government running the country with remote control from a kind of given position. There are no such given positions anymore. States and governments have to earn their legitimacy to a far higher degree than they used to. And the central government, I mean, the word is so plural, is so complex, that the central government needs the local government in order to remain credible and legitimate, in order to do a lot of work and as a bulwark for conflict resolution. Unluckily, most central governments are skeptical to their local government when they, in my mind, should really see them as an asset. We also think that norm and value-wise, decentralization is progressive and worthwhile. That is to say that on the balance, it's a good thing. Then we can discuss what a good thing is. But anyway, we think it's doing good stuff out there. It promotes local democracy, political participation, accountability, women's entry into local politics, responsiveness to local development needs, and many other things. So it's out there doing a lot of good stuff, although it doesn't make a lot of noise always. From a political point of view, it also provides a learning ground for bigger democratization processes. This could be difficult to actually measure tangibly, but I think we have seen this, those of us who've been working with this have seen this happening in many places, where there are deep democratic decentralization, overall democratization of the country in question tend to follow, or at least to be a bit more robust. Having said all this, of course, decentralization is not always good, not all the time, but on the whole, in the big scheme of things, if it's done rightly, it has a big potential. There is a debate out there talking about the crisis of government. It's a French scholar, Rosan Vallon, writes a lot about this, and he says that we have a structural global crisis of government. Central and national government do not anymore manage to run their business as they used to. And this is kind of a broad structural issue coming up that we need to deal with. And we don't have to go to the global south to acknowledge this. And as you know, from the US to Greece, from Spain to Sweden, just to pick a few examples, angry citizens are on the street expressing their disappointment with governments who they perceive being elitist, distant, far away, impotent, or whatever. Governments have problems relating to people on local level, on the grassroots level. And again, I think decentralization is partly a remedy to this problematic. It also has, of course, a high potential to solve local conflicts. They are, you're talking about proximity, and they are closest to the people. It is to the local authorities that people first turn when they have problems, or when they're angry for that matter. Local governments should, in our mind, then be able to have the capacity to be accountable. In many cases, local government want to and try to be accountable, but they simply hasn't been given the means to be properly accountable to the citizens. There is also a part in the book which is explicitly working with post-conflict countries, and that's not a coincidence. It seems like in post-conflict settings, the building of local authority is or could be a key in order to legitimize a new order. And there are some very interesting results showing exactly this coming out now. Okay, that's a number of general points why we think decentralization and local democracy is important, and why is then this volume addressing this. Well, first of all, I think it's a under-researched area. At least it's under-researched in relation to the significance and the size and the scope of this massive global transfer of power that goes on in the quiet, so to speak. Moreover, there is quite a bit of research after all, but that research hasn't really got the resonance it should have. It's good, high-quality research out there, but it doesn't really, we think, reach the policymakers to the extent that it should. And as may be quite unusual in the social sciences, in this field, we think that there are quite a number of quite distinct findings that we know, or we kind of know, that this is how it works, this is how it should work. But it doesn't really get across to policymakers and governments to the extent we would like it to. And of course, one reason for that is that research, even if there's a lot of research out there, it's fragmented research. It is, of course, published in academic places where no policymakers and governments actually read it. So this volume is also an attempt to gather some of this most prominent research and put it into one package and try to make a coherent argument out of it. And decentralization matters, which we think, which is the reason why we put this volume together too. It matters, it is important, and it should be addressed properly. It matters, but it's of course a question of how it is being done. The how question is a critical one. Although, again, we think that the cornerstones for good local government are rather well known, theoretically coherent and proven in some robust empirical research. So, what is then this volume telling us? And of course, we can't go through the entire book. It's a rather massive document, as you see. But I'm going to give you a few sound bites by some of the researchers that has been written in this book. James Maynard, a well-known scholar of decentralization, he tells us a bit provocatively, but I think very importantly as well, it's simple to design a decentralization reform. You only need three things. You need a clear mandate, power that is, for the local authorities. You need a strong downward accountability, and you need ample financial resources. These three things are the things you need. The rest will sort itself out. And he's making convincing argument about this. And I think this is one of these very, very clear policy relevant arguments that this book is quite full of. Leonardo Romeo, which is another prominent scholar, which many of you here may know. He's been working in and out of the UN system and in and out of the university system. He's been working with the UNCDF and been a part of forming UNCDF's policy to decentralization and local governance. And he's convinced that any decentralization reform really need to understand, to listen, to see what the particular locality needs, and from there craft a particular reform process. That is, you need to work from bottom and up, and you need therefore also to understand what the local society is about. Jess Ribaud at the University of Illinois, with massive Africa experience, he's particularly making this argument that with decentralization and particularly in resource management, if accountability shall be expected, the local authorities must have resources to be accountable with. And this is critical because the second point here, what is typical is that the local authorities are giving the mandate, but then they are circumvented when it comes to actual power and resources. So they are kind of undermined by other processes and can't be accountable to the local society as they should. Harry Blair is in the room. Please, Harry. Thank you. Welcome. He makes a highly interesting reflection on the issue of participatory budgeting. Points at the importance and significance of introducing inclusive practices for the core activity of local resource allocation. And this process of participatory budgeting is kind of spreading around the place, though it's not much of a coherent research that's been addressing it or been checking out how it works. Harry is doing that, and success is unclear, although it would need further research to actually, or perhaps longer research to actually see the real impact. It's also, as with many other decentralization reforms, a question of durability. And that brings us to the next writer, Paul Smoke, which is based here in New York, down in the Wagner School. He is a big advocate of decentralization, or used to be in a way, or still is, I guess, but he also skeptical to government commitments. There is a trend, he says now, that we are just starting to see, that decentralization reforms are stalling or even becoming reversed. And he points out that there is very clear reasons for that, and it goes all the way back to how you prepare a reform. And if it isn't properly prepared, you will at some point run aground, so to speak, and where the only policy option is actually to reverse the reform, which of course is not a good thing, because it pulls countries into very indecisive back and forth processes, ending up in the worst of two worlds. Mary Grindle, professor at Harvard, just about to retire. She has been doing massive research, especially in Mexico, and she shows that benefits from decentralization are hard to spot and to measure in the short term, and if you don't really try. But she also argues from a long time, massive empirical long-term research, that it actually gets better. Give local authorities responsibility, resources, and tell them to be accountable, and things do get better. But it takes 10 years, it may take 20 years, but she's showing across the board it does pay off, although it's being very messy and back and forth. Shabir Shima, in another chapter, thank you, Shabir is over there, as you know, who has massive experience both as an academic, as a practitioner, points to another interesting key issue, namely the role of civil society in relation to decentralization and local government. Civil society organizations are, of course, chronically uncoordinated and engages unevenly with local authorities, but the evidence is clear that in democratic systems, the NGO sector usually serves to strengthen the local authority. Hence, there is no contradiction or trade-off in supporting civil society or local authorities, which is often the case in aid and donor contexts. Rather, they are complementing each other. Myself and my co-author, Kim Sanara from Cambodia, is showing that how a decentralization reform in Cambodia have produced a legitimate local government. In this context, it provides, in the post-conflict context, it provides exactly what is needed, and that is a government that is able to make itself legitimate in the eyes of the citizens. It's breaking with the habit of peace agreements that are very centralized and very shallow in that sense. Okay, moving into the overall conclusions. I think it's clear from the contributions in this book and from all the massive empirical research that underlines it, that a sensitively designed local governance reform, decentralization reform, that meet local demands has major potential. If it's done anywhere near in the right way, it seems to be paying off. Having said that, although we know much more now than we did 10 years ago on how to pursue successful decentralization, the process itself is not necessarily simple. The local is always messy, but of course this messiness shouldn't scare us away from actually trying it, because it still pays off although it's messy. And that also needs a disclaimer, perhaps, that decentralization is not necessarily good in itself. There's a lot of pitfalls, like elite capture and corruption and other things. But decentralization tends to be good under certain conditions. The devil's in the details. Accountability is important, but accountability looks very, very different when you actually try to study it and try to see how local authorities are offer accountability, especially if it's a setting with a deep poverty or potential conflicts, etc. It's deeply depending, the accountability offered is of course deeply depending on what resources and power that the local authorities are actually offered. Decentralization is context specific. I mean, we have a number of general ideas in this volume on what is good and what should be avoided, but at the end of the day, it's context specific. And we shouldn't make the fallacy of believing that there is one decentralization. Probably we should talk about decentralizations and be ready to acknowledge variety and plurality in different processes. Finally, to consolidate weak, fragile, or even collapsed states through the creation of local government is an undervalued process and an understudied field. I come originally from a more peace-oriented peace studies, and I'm working also with the peace-building community, and from that point of view, it is right now a very radical, provoking idea that add local government to the mix would be a very efficient peace-building maneuver. And it could be a very efficient peace-building measure in post-conflict settings. Very radical in that community. Final words. I think it's actually Paul Smoke who inspired this one. That decentralization is a process that takes place in relation to an historical over-centralization of state administrations, coming from a particular historical era. And in face of a globalization which is breaking up the idea of a simple and homogeneous world where political authority can be monopolized by central level in make-believe nation states. Decentralization is in many ways about getting real and try to solve the issues and the problems. Hence, as we see it, it's inevitable that we see historical readjustment to more accountable local governments. And at the end of the day, that's what this volume tries to catch. Thank you, everybody.
Many thanks, Professor, for this very interesting and thought-provoking presentation. This has been the result of a process. As we both said at the beginning, there was also another process that followed up and integrated these perspectives. We heard this introduction to very important general concepts, and some elements are based on regional analysis, as you said, from Asia or Africa. The second volume is actually zooming into a region, and we would like to now to listen to the second presenter before we open the floor for exchanges. Now, therefore, I give the floor to Shabir Chima, who will introduce the second volume. So, Shabir, you have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Massimo. I say very warm aloha. When you come from Hawaii, aloha means peace, love, care, warmth, and goodwill, all put into one. And yesterday was 85 degrees there. Sorry I couldn't bring sun with me, but I'm so delighted to be here, where I spent 18 years of my professional life at the UN headquarters and UNDP and DESA, and equally happy to be in what we call in the UN a hardship post, which is Honolulu, Hawaii. Now, in the second volume, a group of 10 scholars examined key issues in democratic local governance, the effectiveness of reforms in democratic local governance, and number 3, the factors that influence those reforms. The key objective, the central objective of the volume was to assess the quality of local democracy. And the reason we focus on quality of local democracy is because of the fact that we have seen over the last many decades that institutional designs do not always produce the outcomes for which the institutions are designed, such as electoral democracy may not lead to greater participation and accountability. First is the design, second is the outcome. So we wanted to go one step further and look at the quality of local democracy. I would like to share with you today some of the overall conclusions and policy messages that emerge from 5 sets of topics that we focused on. The first was the impact of decentralization policies and programs on local democracy, on the quality of local democracy. And a group of people, including James Manner and several scholars from Asian countries, examined both the theory and practice. And essentially, 3 key messages emerged from that work in the book. The first is that where elected local councils do not have elected local council at the intermediate level of administration, such as districts, they are unable to get political and technical support because the legislators at the national level are very, very reluctant to share power and resources. When I talk with Swedes on that, they are shocked. But that is the reality, at least in many Asian countries, that even in democracies, the central political leaders are very reluctant to share power with the local governments. And so we made the argument that the need is to sell the idea to senior politicians at the national level and emphasize how local democracy can and has produced political gains for national politicians. The greater the legitimacy of the local democratic process, the greater the possibility that a national politician can use that legitimacy to enhance his or her power. It requires long-term thinking on the part of the politician. Many cases also show difficulties of sustaining decentralization policies and programs where, particularly in Asia, national political systems are unstable. Sometimes military-led governments strengthen elected local councils for their own political legitimacy, but that is not sustainable. And in many countries, when the elected national governments come in power, they are reluctant to share power. So that becomes the dilemma. So you may have a democratic system, a democratic country with a very weak local democracy mechanism, processes, and practices. The third and the main finding from the first set of issues is that when we talk about quality of democracy, there are 4 variables which are very critical. The first is the need for greater weight to devolution than to deconcentration. Because the word decentralization is misused and abused. You deconcentrate to set up a new office at the district level and say, oh, we got revolutionary decentralization policy. Decentralization policy's core is devolution. So therefore, which means actually giving power and resources to local governments. Also, the need for shift from vertical to horizontal responsibility with a, number 3, a clear provision for transfer of resources through formal legislation, not that the Prime Minister decides that this year I'm going to give this much money. We're talking about the process, the formal process and the system. And the 4th is where the local government is, where the governance overall between national, subnational, local is collaborative, is shared governance. And we have seen, for example, in Indonesia, one of my students just finished his dissertation on impact of decentralization in Indonesia using the original data in all the provinces of Indonesia. And what he found out was that since the introduction of what they call Big Bang decentralization in Indonesia, there have been significant improvements in the Human Development Index, level of participation, and the degree of local innovations. He's got these 3 sets of variables delineated related with the Big Bang decentralization, which I can explain during discussion. And you see a very clear linkage between the two. The second issue, set of issue we discussed in the volume dealt with service delivery and access. Now the studies presented in the book show that services can be decentralized across the board, but some are better coordinated at the national level, and even the local services do require support from the center. So it's not, and it should not be either or. Also, that the local capacity and often the reluctance of central government actors to relinquish authority are constraints to effective service delivery and access. Kadmiel Vakwete, who was one of the directors of CDF for many years, based largely on his work both in Asia and Africa, he really made the argument that service delivery, access, and utilization, these 3 sets, should be viewed in a holistic manner, and that spatial and functional hierarchies in service delivery should be defined and discussed to improve our understanding, and that's the key point, our understanding of power and authority relationships. Service delivery is not a technocratic job alone. Service delivery and access is also a part of the dynamics of power and authority relationships in the society. So therefore, his argument is that different combinations of centralization and decentralization might be needed for different services. And also another thing under service delivery that comes from the report is that access of the poor, and that of course is very key to the UN's post-2015 development agenda, that access to services of the poor continues to be a challenge. If we want to talk about inclusive governance, if we want to take engagement of all stakeholders, that issue needs to be dealt with. The third set of issues that the book dealt with was citizen participation and the role of cities association in the engagement of urban residents in local development processes. Tim Campbell, a well-known urban specialist, argues that quality fairness, and regularity of local councils are key indicators of local participation, along with free media and access to information. He has identified as the key contributor to this part. Tim Campbell has argued that there are 3 dimensions of participation in urban development. First-person participation in decision-making, with which we are very familiar through election, local parliament, citizen engagement at different level. But then he talks about the second, which is the virtual participation through wireless net in urban areas, through wireless networks such as government to citizen, G2C, government to business, G2B, citizen to citizen, which is C2C, and citizen to government, which is C2G. And the third, of course, domain or dimension that he talks about of participation focuses on city-level learning, meaning group of like-minded individual and the groups trying to mobilize to learn from their own experiences. So Tim Campbell argues that cities really, without saying that, I mean, he's really saying cities are the future, because 50% of the world population is soon going to be in cities. And cities are centers of innovation, technology, and growth, and entrepreneurship. And so therefore, participation there is extremely important. And he also argues that is the virtual, and which is the dimension, second dimension, that is the virtual and the city level learning, which is expanding, which is new, which is unique, that we got to, which is a cutting edge new idea that we are to be focusing on, rather than going back to the traditional. Of course, personal participation is important, but the last two make it much more meaningful in the local context. So his main argument, therefore, is that the role of mayors and elected local leaders in urban setting ought to be recognized. He doesn't quite use the argument when mayors rule the world, you might have seen their book, but essentially points at the same. And that, of course, to me personally, it's fascinating point. I feel passionately about that. It affects me a lot because in 1992, when the UN organized the first, UNDP organized the first global mayors summit, which was held at the United Nations and in the General Assembly, that was a starting point when a lot of cities associations got engaged. And since then, we have seen that the cities associations through Habitat, through UNDP, through this and other organizations have become a major player in not only being in the trenches, meaning providing services to citizens, but also being very actively engaged in normative intergovernmental processes of the United Nations system. Under participation, also local government associations, LGAs, are important. And one of my collaborators, Anders Lindström, who is present here, fortunately, he did a study analysis of 192 countries, the status of local government associations. And he concludes that there is no significant relationship between wealth of a state and the existence of local government associations. You have active local government associations in the poor countries, but there are some middle income countries, these associations may not be present. His second conclusion, states with less than 1 million inhabitants are significantly less likely to have LGA. And thirdly, that the level of democratization and decentralization and the protection of human rights are the most critical variables in explaining variation among different countries, which means higher the level of decentralization and protection of human rights, greater the possibility that there will be active civil society, active local government associations in that country, which I think is quite interesting finding. The fourth set of issues we discussed was the role of gender and rights-based government in inclusive governance. The Asian experience shows, based on what Kamala Chandra and the colleague, other collaborator argued, that Asia, 4 pathways to gender equity, role of gender equity in democratic process have been used. One is the electoral quota system, which is in India such as in India through the amendment to the Indian Constitution. Gender mainstreaming mechanism in decentralization in all programs, such as in Cambodia at the district level having a gender mainstreaming committee. Comprehensive and multi-stakeholder collective action, that is the model pathway used in Indonesia. An emphasis on local leadership in mainstreaming gender issues, and that is the pattern in the Philippines. The main argument of the book is that rights-based approach to gender responsive governance requires the empowerment of women so that they not only know the right but also have the capability to exercise these rights and hold the state accountable with such tools as gender mainstreaming and participatory budgeting. While democratic local governance provides an enabling environment for gender equality, we also find that in all countries that the patterns of local power structure and existing inequality constrain the desired outcome. And I think the final conclusion under that, which I find very interesting, that gender equity is not a woman issue, it's a societal issue. And if it is a societal issue, the policy response is the need for the empowered constituencies at multi levels of government and administration to promote what my colleagues call attitude change and access to resources. And that's the dilemma, that's the issue that needs to be dealt with. My final point in the next 2 minutes that I have is the fifth dimension that we looked at in this volume. And the point there is that local democracy can only thrive and be sustainable and be of a high quality when local governments are accountable and transparent. You talk with the local governments, they want the power and resources, but the minute you start talking about accountability mechanism, they become nervous. And that's where the scholars come in, because we are not part of the system. We can look at more objectively. So I always tell the mayor that, well, you achieved the first part, which is devolution. Now we need the second part to make the system complete. Now there, what we find is that effective local democracy requires local governments that have not only the resources and authority, but are also accountable. We also find in Asia there are a lot of innovations to promote local accountability tools and instruments that have been used, including transparency of public procurement system. In Andhra Pradesh in India, the electronic system to offer contracts and tenders online. In Seoul metropolitan region, the Integrity Pact to combat corruption so that the corruption is neither accepted on the part of the giver or on the part of the taker. And so these two mechanisms are very widely used and disseminated actually within the Asia region. The other is participatory mechanism and auditing, such as in Brazil and the Philippines, participatory budgeting. My final comment in the one key message that comes from this book, the policy implication of the book is that national governments can provide an enabling environment for local democracy through 3 types of interventions. Number one, interventions dealing with the creation of multi-level institutional framework. That's what Joachim was talking about, a decentralization framework at multi-level, because that is a starting point. That may not be an end in itself. Decentralization may not promote local democracy, but it's a starting point. Second, policy, those interventions from the national government concerning capacity development of local governments. Because all of our studies show phenomenal, tremendous, the gaps between capacity at the central level and the local government level. And you may set up a system, but as sometimes we say in the US, where is the beef? So you need the people with the capacity to be able to exercise the power and resources they have, both with effectiveness and accountability. And the third, those interventions dealing with the provision of services, infrastructure, and local economic development. Because the quality of democracy is not only institution, quality of democracy is also access to local services and economic development opportunity. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Shabir. We have now the full picture of the outcomes of these 2 workshops and the books that have been produced, the general conclusions, some conclusions that are relevant at the regional level, but for Asia, but actually I think are also very valuable in a broader perspective. So we have some 1 hour now to have an exchange. In the room we have some of the contributors to these publications. We have representatives of permanent missions. We have UN practitioners. So I'm looking forward to an active exchange. We have microphones that can be used for your interventions. I would like to stress that the conceptual analysis of the state of decentralization has pointed that a very complex situation. Nothing is black or white. We have a very composite picture that looks at the strengths of approaches, but also some of the pitfalls that are related perhaps to an oversimplification, if I can recall one of the conclusions of Professor Oyendal, associated with the decentralization process. So we need to understand this process in all its complexity, and still consider that in the long term positive impacts are associated with decentralization processes that look also at the issue of capacities at the local level and a proper match between national and local levels of planning. The role of different actors has been mentioned, including the role of civil society, and I think that there is also a growing body of knowledge, fragmented research perhaps, but more research has been collected and maybe more needed to systematize such research in the perspective of drawing more lessons. And I would also recall his key message that the context is so important that you cannot really abstract from it in order to understand what works, what doesn't work, and you cannot really propose a recipe that worked in one situation without taking into account the reality of a different context. And on the other hand, I think we had a very interesting presentation on with the regional focus. I would recall out of the many things that Shabir highlighted, also the importance of addressing the power relations, being aware of the power relations that are at play, very relevant when coming to the analysis of the impact of decentralization with gender lens. I think that the need for accountability and transparency is also very important, but it should be placed also in context. Once again, if I can add something from the perspective of international idea, it is very interesting to see that the local government is also a platform, in some cases, for the growth of new leaders and that may actually access the national level. But it is telling that once they access the national level, they start to play with the rules of national politics. To some extent, you might expect that somebody who grew up as a local level leader could be more aware of the implications of national local relationships, but in fact the game is really played at the national level with rules that sometimes hide a little bit these local dynamics. So here this shows that it is not only about the people, it is about the rules that drive the dynamics between the national and the local. People are very important. Leaders that grow up from the local level may bring a change, and we have many examples. It comes to my mind what happened in Colombia some 20 to 15 years ago with a reform of the electoral system that gave more voice to people in order to choose their mayors. And it was telling that at the time some mayors were the targets of organized crime and local guerrilla movements because they exposed themselves for local development in such a way that they became really victims in the end of their own political success. So it is also true that there is a transformative element in this growth from the local to the national. But we have also other examples where the rules of the game at the national actually are so pervasive that in the end the initiative, the agency of individuals is not enough. We need to change the environment, the political environment, the culture of democratic engagement, and again, what you said about the gender lens on decentralization is quite telling. So I tried to really summarize what struck me out of these interesting conversation, but I'm looking forward to any comments that may come to the floor, questions that you may have, elements that you want to integrate, also from the point of view of the current UN debates. So the floor is open. Is there anybody who wants to volunteer here from the back? Do we have the microphone? Thank you. Please identify yourself.
Yeah, I'm Mr. Harry Reynolds from the Ghana Mission.
Good.
Yeah, I didn't hear a lot of the examples from Africa, but then from what I know, I realized that a lot of good material, a lot of people don't want to go to the rural areas where their services are needed because they lack they don't have the same facilities that we have in the big cities. So it tends to be a big disincentive. And then I also I wanted to know whether in your work you dwelt on the historical and cultural environment of the particular areas, because in every country you don't have the same systems all over the country. So what may pertain to a particular area may not fit into a particular area. So under those circumstances, what would be your best measure in getting a very good local government system or the decentralization? Then in Ghana, we have a situation where the government felt that if we allow people to be elected, a lot of people don't want to get into politics. We might not have the benefit of the experience of good people. So, for example, some of our senior men, like the gentleman who is at your right, if he were to be in a particular village and he doesn't want to put himself up for local election, the government realized that they will need this experience. For such people, they gave them honorary positions on the local council so that they will tap into their experiences, rather not to let them go dead. Thank you. So I wanted you to comment on these areas.
Thank you very much. We have one more intervention from here. Please qualify yourself before.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm Vlad Lupan, permanent representative of Moldova. So from Eastern Europe, the other region you have referred to. Professor Oyandal, you spoke about the legitimacy of the local government, and Professor Chima spoke about the certain democratic principles. I would like to put them together in a brief manner. Sorry for shortness. This will not give a lot of details what I mean, but I think you will get the point. The legitimacy is closely linked to more efficiency of the local governments, or the efficiency of the local governments. And they are interlinked, not just linked, but interlinked, because the more efficiency will give more legitimacy. I think this is closely related not only to decentralization and fiscal decentralization in particular, but also the capacity buildings. And here we come with the third element in the entire story. I think what Professor Chima mentioned, democratic governance overall in a country is very important in this respect, including various policies, not only on the local government, but also on education, for example, and other issues. So I think there is an interlinkage between these three. The second point that I wanted to make is the interaction between national, regional, and international levels. If there is a political will of a country, then there is also additional tools. The experience we can gain in Eastern and Western Europe, for example, is the fact that we are working with the Council of Europe. There is a charter of European Charter of Local Autonomy that is basically guiding us. This is a very good document. Therefore, these regional examples provide us with very good expertise already existing in the area. And I think these, and of course we take the UN. UNDP in Moldova is working on joint integrated local government project, for example. So these three levels are also very important for an effective discussion on the local government's reform and decentralization. The third point is civil society. It's interesting that it comes from you, because you are civil society. I think the NGO or civil society organization in various forms, participation, can be effective depending on the way how they organize themselves, indeed. So they might be disorganized, but sometimes they might be organized. It very much depends on the interest. In my country, mayors and civil society organize themselves in a Congress of local administrations from Moldova, which they called CALM. Yeah, okay. So they were calmly working with the central government in a dialogue. So there is a way for the civil society to certainly contribute in relations with the local government to the dialogue with the central government, and the other way around. And the last point is on conflicts. Unfortunately, my country is a country where we have, I would call a post-conflict situation, though it's quite difficult to call it post-conflict. It's a frozen conflict. We believe that the reform of the local government, and we strive for that as a country that goes towards the European integration, we believe that the local government's reform can be a good example for everyone involved in the conflict resolution. But there is one problem here. All sides and all actors involved, from all their sides, we should see a democratic approach, which is not always the case. Sometimes, actually, the lack of democratic approaches in terms of the central and local government is the reason for this conflict. So this is a sword with two blades, so to say, and the coin has two faces here. And if you could elaborate on that, I would appreciate that. Sorry for too many questions, but it's a very interesting topic.
It were all very interesting questions. Thank you very much for that.
Position to be
Is there-
making
yes.
public statements.
One
I
there.
appreciate that. Thank you. I'll introduce myself though and my background. My name is Sulena Low, and I work for the Department of Peacekeeping Operations. I'm just returning from South Sudan, where I was state coordinator for one of the states in South Sudan. And it was our job, in fact, to help build the local governance and local government, accountable to the local government. And this tension between the state and the national, the local level government was was a huge factor, and continues to be in the conflict in South Sudan. So I appreciate the research that was done, but I'm looking at it from the perspective of a practitioner who needs these kinds of tools and resources to actually do our work. And I'm very interested in the comments that were made both by the representative of Ghana and from Moldova, because there are parallels and commonalities. But in fact, the context was very different. So the three things that was raised in the first presenter's comments about decentralization and the simplicity of it, that you need a mandate, resources, and accountability, are in fact they are minefields, each and every one of those things. So they're far from simple, and in practice are hard to achieve, especially, and I'm talking of course about post-conflict countries that we are working in and that we are required to build this capacity in. So I'm trying to actually find how your research can be of value to us. And I know it is, and I think partly the second presenter made this comment about convincing national politicians about the use of such research and how this can help them. This is extremely valuable. So if stuff like that can be brought to the attention of practitioners, we can find a use for your research. Right now, it's all sort of in the hypothetical for me, and I'm grasping at things, trying to pull from it something that I can practically use. So I would love to hear more about it. I mean, I think it's very valuable research, but probably at too general a level to be of value to us when we are practicing it. So maybe, I don't know, you can point us to other tools or maybe do some more research that would be of value to us. And I would be very happy to share experiences of our practical concerns and problems that we face, the reality on the ground when conflict is still ongoing. But the only answer is, in fact, to build local government and try to have accountable local government and try to build a national consensus around local authority. So many challenges, of course, but even the word decentralization is fraught with problems. Perhaps a better thing would be to strengthen local government, because decentralization means to the central authority they're giving up some power. This is very problematic, even in just proposing it to them. So maybe the terminology itself is something that's important to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now Guido Bertucci.
Guido Bertucci, Governance Solution International. I just wanted to bring the perspective of Latin America to see how it compares, for example, to Asia. And I'm involved every year in a big gathering of Latin American mayors, which takes place in Miami, organized by Florida International University and the city of Miami. And I have identified some 3 pluses which relate to the presentation. The pluses in Latin America are that there is in most countries the institutional framework for decentralization. In most countries, actually, there is actual devolution of responsibilities. Second plus is that there is a lot of innovations. A lot of the mayors show an enormous amount of creativity, innovation in resolving everyday issues from transportation to refuse disposal, etc., etc. And also there is a growth of association of municipalities in Mexico, Colombia, etc. These are the pluses. On the minus side is that the devolution of responsibility is not always, most of the time, is not accompanied by the commensurate amount of resources. So most of the major complaints, we have a lot of new responsibilities, but we have no funds. Second is that the lack of capacity, which was identified by Shabir. Some of the mayors, some of the local officials are, some of them farmers, some of them store owners, but they do not have the capacity to manage towns. Third, lack of accountability. Lack of accountability, as was mentioned also by Shabir. They somehow mimic the practices of the national government in terms of procurement and other financial issues. So I thought I would share this with respect to Latin America. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We had already a group of questions. Maybe we could get back to the panel. And I would perhaps, there are some questions that have been addressed specifically to one panelist, but feel free to pick any of them. So please, Professor Oyendal.
Thank you very much. Extremely interesting questions, and of course very challenging. And I'll see what I can respond to them. Trying to have a broad answer to the post-conflict situation, or the frozen conflict, as you mentioned. I guess the most obvious case here is the phase of peace agreement, implementing peace agreement, crafting a legitimate government, come development-prone government. That's easier in brackets when you start with a peace agreement. And the argument here is that historically our peace agreements very central, very elite-based organizations, and we have a terrible track record, or at least 50% of, or something like that, of countries that goes into a peace agreement goes back to violence within 5 years. And the explanation to this, or one of the explanations to this, I think, is that the peace agreements and their implementations are extremely shallow in terms of integrating society and people in a more organic way. It's being done in the name of democracy, liberal democracy, as a machine that is kind of inserted and then expected to kind of be peaceful, generate peace by itself, so to speak, like an administrative machine, which it doesn't do, of course. To some extent, this dominance of kind of getting in there from the UN and other systems, establish a system, and getting out is a little bit of a wishful thinking. It takes long time for a conflict, a country with deep-seated conflicts, to actually get back to normalcy. It's a generational issue, and it's, in my view, not sufficient to establish a liberal democracy and then move out. That is setting oneself up for failure. So that's the kind of key argument why it's not enough with elections on national level, but as a part of that package, I would like to see the creation of local government and local democratic government, hopefully, that could actually work as a good force on the local level. That takes me to your absolutely correct observations on how do one actually transfer this kind of generalized knowledge into particular cases, and especially how do one do that in a should we call it peace building amidst violence, we could call it. We see that happening in South Sudan, we see it happening in Colombia, we saw it being attempted in Sri Lanka, we've been seeing it in the Palestine. It's a very difficult issue to kind of pursue peace building in the midst of violence, and there isn't any simple issues there. I think you need to get to a point where there is a general consensus on what kind of political system should we actually have, and then start to work with that particular system. If you come there, I think there are ways of possibly avoiding what you say, that you creating local governments becomes just another part of the problem, because the problem is disagreement within the various political elites, and that is just reproduced on local level. I've had a quite deep experience with Cambodia, and there it was perhaps by default, but the local democratic government was designed so that it's not different parties competing against each other. It's like a permanent coalition government, which has served, I mean, many other reasons as well, but it has served to actually not emphasize party and elite differences in local authority. And we just recently made a in-depth study, and as it turns out there, the key problems that the local government has is not with the other parties or the other at local level, but with the upper levels, its own, I mean, their own party's central administration. The gap, so to speak, was bigger in a vertical way than it was in a horizontal way. But that was, of course, goes all the way back to how you design the political system. To me, it goes back very much to legitimacy, and it has several dimensions. First is the immediate legitimacy. You need, in any kind of peace agreement, in any kind of restart, in any kind of reformation of a system to get it more peacefully, you need to craft a broad consensus of the new regime. And when I say regime, I don't mean government, I mean the new political order that's being crafted. And I think that can't be crafted from central level. I mean, the peace agreement may be brilliant and very kind of attractive anyway, but you can't be standing on the Capitol and shouting loud enough to convince the local people. You need to have your lieutenants, if you like, but I don't mean that in a military sense. You need to have your local government at the local level being there, transforming all the good things that hopefully is in this peace agreement to the people. Explain why this is a new start, why it could actually work, and in which way it could then actually work. In a development context, it's of course very useful if such a move could be coordinated with donors and other development partners that could actually insert resources to kind of drape such a process in a what should you call it, somewhat more resource-rich process. So it's kind of something in it for everyone, which is quite possible in many post-conflict settings, because there are typically quite a lot of resources available for crafting these kind of resources. And I think in my mind the UNCDF has been working historically very efficiently or very creatively in these kind of processes. And on coming to the other dimension of legitimacy, which is in the longer term, where you also need to have efficiency, service delivery. You actually have not just to talk nicely to the people, you actually have to deliver something as well, which of course is tricky, and you need often resources, financial resources to do that. And that takes us to this kind of multi-level idea, where the local governments can often not just work by themselves. To some extent that is happening in Somalia. They actually do kind of put together local government before they put together central government. But it is in a relation between local government, national government, international actors, and all the kind of NGO and research community in the outer circle, that this could actually be crafted into a working concert. But it requires, of course, a lot of crafting, a lot of design, a lot of champions who are actually trying to take a grip on it, and to have an idea and a big vision on how to do this. I'm not getting all the way there, but I would love to talk about it, because I personally have experience from the same or similar situation as you have. So I'm kind of moving a little bit between my two different identities.
Thank you very much. And now Shabir.
Thank you very much. I think The two questions of these comments, there are two which are very interrelated. First is, how do you assess context as a variable in designing a decentralization program? That was the essence of our colleague from Africa, the way I understood it. And the second is that context in conflict countries is very different. How do you apply these universal, global, regional principles in that context? I mean, I've been working for 25 years on decentralization, and I just came back last month after 4 weeks in Iraq, till I was evacuated from Erbil, unfortunately due to those ISIS attacks. Erbil, we never expected there will be, ISIS will be attacking there. I can show you that we are dealing really, the basic issue that we are dealing with, bridging the gap between theory and practice. I am very different because I have 1 foot in the UN for a long time, but I'm also academic. But I would say a lot of people are not in that category, are not that fortunate the way I think I am. Everybody is fortunate, but I'm just trying to make a point. So we look at the situation from our own perspective in the situation we are, and we want to pick up various pieces. If our goal is to bridge the gap between theory and practice, we got to understand the principle and the theory, because principle and theory is a starting point for good practice. Okay, no, so that's the first part. The second part is that we have to have a different levels of analysis of that principle. If I'm sitting in Iraq, in Erbil, I'm trying to design a program for Iraq along with a group of Iraqi nationals. My unit of analysis is very different to inform policy, to inform program. If I'm working in a training and research institution, I'm looking at good practices, my unit of analysis is a little bit different. But it doesn't mean that these two are contradictory. I mean, I can say with confidence that nothing at least that I have said will be contrary to the practice of decentralization the way we know. But if we were to see how to actually do a particular program, one has to go in the trenches. And in Iraq, we had a team of 20 people. We met the mayors, we brought the mayors together, we did the assessment of the situation in Iraq, what is feasible, not what is ideal, what is feasible. And then secondly, we met various actors to see, they will tell you, yes, we want to do decentralization. Because if you look at Iraq, the real issue in Iraq is the issue of decentralization, political decentralization, and followed by administrative and financial. Now, as an analyst, then you say, but I know it's not going to happen. They're not going to do it. And that's where the real crisis come. We are always challenged, and I'm glad you challenge all of us. I'm challenged by my president of Research Center that, Mr. Chima, we want research which informs public policy. But to undertake research to inform public policy, you have to be very clear about the unit of analysis you're talking about. Whether we are seeking impact of research on program level intervention in the trenches, or we are looking at intervention, a holistic country level program. And the principles will be the same, but practical solutions will be different. So later we can exchange program notes, and I can share with you my 18 years in UNDP designing about 60 or 70 decentralization program in conflict in other countries, and what are some of the concrete interaction that work, and I think that may be of interest to you. Secondly, very quickly, I want to say that conceptually the point is well taken, legitimacy and democratic principle. To me, legitimacy is the outcome, and democratic principle and process is the intervening or independent variable. So it's the outcome that we are talking. And I fully agree with you, the linkage between the local, national, and international. I can tell you an anecdote at my age. My wife always tells me, don't tell anecdotes, but I can't resist it. In 1996, we organized the first UN conference on governance in the General Assembly. I think it was chaired by Kofi Annan, Secretary General Kofi Annan. So we, from the Secretariat, made the rule that the ambassador and civil society will sit together in the General Assembly. And within the General Assembly, somebody asked, Guido was there, the Mr. Secretary General, I'm the ambassador of this country and I come and there's no separate seat for me and civil society is sitting all over. And the Secretary General Kofi Annan said, Excellency, that is the point. I mean, that's the real story that happened. It's in our report that came in 1996. I don't know whether Christian Helgason is here. So the point being that the changes that you're seeing in the world today on local democracy, democratic local governance, is a accumulation of the impacts, pressures, dialogue, discussion from the regional and global level as well. It's back and forth. It's actually a two-pronged process. One is advocacy from regional and global level, and more important is pressure from below, because the citizens are more informed, they know better. These two have come together. Some of my former UNDP colleagues used to say conditionality is conditionality. No, it's not conditionality. It's a partnership where the actors who want a change at the country level in a particular setting, they bring in some ideas and they are empowering and they're strengthening the local actors, and that's where the change actually comes. The final comment I would make, as Guido rightly said, that it's really in Latin America, they still keep on talking about the low capacity, low accountability, and low level of resources. But I think everything is different. The Latin America vis-a-vis Asia is way, way advanced when it comes to decentralization and its impact. And of course, they got to keep on pushing the envelope. They want to get better. At the end of the day, decentralization is like a Chinese dish, chop suey. You got to have ingredients, right ingredients, dealing with the kind of chop suey that you want. Number two, you need capacity of local government, because nothing, that's the pillar, nothing will work without that. And number three, and I didn't say in my presentation, Joachim didn't say, none of you said, but that is the key point, ongoing experimentation and learning from one's own experience. I think these outside intervention and principles, they can get the debate discussion started. Countries have to learn on their own. The local actors have to do the regular experimentation. And therefore, my final comment that decentralization is not like building a bridge. It's a long-term process. It needs patience. If you are an engineer and you somehow are the manager of a decentralization project, I'm sure you're going to have a hard time in understanding what I'm doing here. Yeah.
Thank you. Do you want to, please?
Just to add to the rhetorical question here, what use do we have of these findings? From a practical point of view, I mean, I represent SALAR as well, and we've had many, many projects over the years in various countries in terms of in partnerships to build up the local governments and all associations or the local level. And I think there is enough research done to show that local governments makes a difference. But as you rightly pointed out, it is also a matter of power, and power is a delicate matter, and one size doesn't fit all. In our experience, in any way, I think we use quite a lot of research to convince in the various situations, because they are all different. So we use the findings of research to convince people with power afraid or being afraid of decentralizing the power. They might do it in a scheme, a beautiful democratic scheme of a decentralized nation, but where the power still remains very centralized. And I think that there is, I was going to say that you have to look at the specifics of each region or each country where you have to convince, rather with other types of arguments, that it isn't a loss of power. In fact, and I was going to come to, I think there are research showing also that those giving away power in that sense also gains power, and they become more popular as politicians. They are more safe. They have all to gain from arranging a decentralized, functioning, accountable local system or local governance. So I understood it as a rhetorical question, but yes, there are challenges, but it's certainly feasible and you can do it. And another thing I think is to find the right balance of, I think the most sustainable projects that we have made have all been taking their starting point from trying to work out the local capacity building of sort of the local. It has to come from bottom up. That sounds like it's said many times, but it's really true here that you have to find the combination of bottom up and top down in a way, in a delicate situation. So one size doesn't fit all, but it's certainly doable. We also use the research findings in very practical in international training programs quite a lot to sort of boost the cause and try to help and capacitate people in convincing the benefit. You can, in my view, you mentioned before gender equality. Women is not a liability, it's an asset for a society, and therefore you should promote gender equality, for instance, also on a local level, because women do contribute. That sounds weird when you say it out loud, but the world doesn't really look like that. And it's the same here, I would say. Thank you.
Well, before we open up the floor again for other questions, there were 2 out of the 4 questions of the permanent representative of Moldova that may be in need still of an answer. One is the interaction between the national, the regional, and the international levels. I mean, it was a comment based on the experience of Moldova with respect to the Council of Europe, but perhaps you may have something on that. And also the civil society and the dependence of its effectiveness on the way they are organized. The other comment that he made. Yeah.
Sorry, there were many questions. I skipped that. That was my contribution in the first volume. I think the word disorganized might have conveyed a wrong meaning. That civil society is both disorganized, which sometimes it becomes its liability, but it also is flexible, which becomes its biggest strength. So that's the point being made there. But of course, in a snapshot, the word disorganized was picked up, but it's disorganized. One of the issues, for example, we all know, people are asking, who is civil society accountable to? Government officials are saying that, even the local actors are saying that. Very legitimate question. But they also know that this very concept of flexibility of civil society to be able to respond to a crisis, to a disaster. That is the biggest asset. Otherwise, there is no need for civil society. So at the end of the day, the idea is that how can the government provide an environment in which those tremendous assets of civil society can be utilized. We recently did some work on role of local governance on natural disasters, case studies of China, India, Indonesia, Pakistan, and Vietnam. And you see very clearly that even in a political system like China, after disaster, the NGO responses, the people's organization responses to the disasters are much more pronounced and very, very visible. In fact, in The Economist, there was a special issue a couple of months ago that shows, actually documents that. And I was just in China 2 weeks ago, where another case study was presented where we looked at a disaster, major disaster, earthquake that took place, and we did an in-depth analysis of 5-7 years later, what happened to the community? How did the government respond? And we look at the 5 aspects of the disaster cycle, starting from immediate response, recovery, rehabilitation, shelter, etc. And we did the original survey, and then we found out the reality is that even in China, where civil society hypothetically is not active, which it is not, even there, civil society response was tremendous in terms of supporting the government initiative. So yes, that point was not that it's a disorganized in negative sense. It's just that it's a flexible and the government has to find a way to facilitate that. And then on the relationship between the three, I think as I mentioned earlier already, that I see as an asset. And this is my bias because I was at the UN for a major part of my professional life, and I felt that if I have to rethink the whole thing, I'm not apologetic about the UN, European Union, Nordic countries, speaking out for local democracy, for democratic transition. When in 1996, we were preparing UNDP's first policy paper on governance. I won't mention the name of the member states who supported and the names who opposed that, but I was told that my job was on the line as the director of UNDP's governance division because I was venturing into an area which was a conditionality and a entity like UNDP should not do it. Today, 40–50% of UNDP's resources are going in democratic governance, with the largest program being in Indonesia, which is about $200 million project. So the world has changed. It's a giant partnership, and I really feel the role of the international community in these global norms and standards has been positive. Sometimes manager like me, we get ahead of ourselves and we just move too forward, too rush into things, and we don't adequately appreciate the local context and local sensitivity. But the reality is, on balance, I think that's a good thing, change that has happened. And Moldova actually is an excellent example where we started the UNDP program in 1992 and 93. Yeah.
Well, are there any other questions? I did have, okay, very good. Harry Blair?
This dialogue has been very instructive, I think, in many ways, one of which is illustrating the state of the art in supporting local governance. And it's illustrated what is a characteristic tension whenever we talk about local governance, and that is Shabir started his earlier remarks about context. The particularities. You have to be a social anthropologist in a sense if you're going to do local governance. But then he ended with the generalities. And there's that tension between the general practice and the local context. And both of you have had extensive experience, both in direct involvement with local democracy and in editing your volumes. So a lot of experience here, and this is what I'd like to ask you. Looking at all the places you've been and the places you've read about and the places you've studied, in the general sense, what would you say is, if you were forced to pick one thing that I notice more than anything else when I try and figure out local governance or deal with it or improve it, what would that one thing be? And might be the legal system enforcing the rules, might be elections. Can the citizens overturn local government that they don't like and replace it? Maybe that's the most important. Decentralizing the bureaucracy. If the health ministry people are still working for the central government and not for the local government, nothing's going to happen. That's what I notice the most often. Is it maybe media and press, ability to find wrongdoing? Could it be the commitment of the national leadership that Jim Maynard was talking about? That's political will. That's the most important thing. Civil society, is that it? That citizens have to be able to make demands on the government outside of elections. Or maybe it's popular support, that legitimacy issue. That's most important. So both of you, is there one thing that you could say, this is what I noticed most of all? Thanks.
I think if my vote would be for representative local government with devolution, and that local government is catalyst for development at the local level. And I see as the central factor, and we have seen that in debate on rural development in the 70s and 80s, to which you contributed significantly. We have seen the transition from the concept of public administration to democratic local governance, the paradigm shift that took place. We have seen the change in a paradigm shift about the word development, the way we think about development, from growth to sustainable human development, poverty alleviation. We have seen all those transitions. And the relationships, to what extent the local government can achieve each of the above, of course, there may be studies on all sides, but at the end of the day, reality still is that the elected local government with devolution, with political and financial authority, and more important, as catalyst in development, engage in service delivery and access, is the end goal we want to achieve. Because to me, that's the practical demonstration of local democracy, because local democracy is a value. Elected local government is a key instrument to get to that value. And that would be the one that I'll pick.
Yeah, that's a tricky one, Eric.
That was part of my idea.
Yeah, I guess so. And it's, of course, hard to disagree with Chima's point here, but if I'm going to go for one point which is a little bit more, less expected, would be that, in my experience, that one of the key things that the local government should do, is to close the state-society gap, to minimize the distance from the government to the citizens. And of course, I mean, that's basically what Chima talked about, but it's actually beyond that. I think that at least in conflict-prone countries, the most valuable thing you can have a local government to is actually to include people in government, if you like, to include people in the running of government, or at least show people that we care, you matter, and we are actually here to listen to you, we are actually here to do whatever we can to respond to your problems. And I think that in many resource-stripped countries, people understand that there isn't money laying around waiting for them to just tap into. And they don't demand that, but they do demand someone from the government who's actually there, who is facing them and who is responding to what they say. And from a conflict prevention point of view, which tend to be my trade, I think would we be able to establish that, we would go a far way to get local government as being a machine of conflict prevention, if you like. I do break the rules, Harry, I'm sorry. I need to throw in another one, which is actually a response to issues that have been up here before, and actually which you addressed, Jerker. I would like to take every central power holder, central government power holder in the world, and not talk to them and make the argument that decentralizing power is actually to increase your power. You are making yourself, I mean, central power holders are making themselves very vulnerable by not decentralizing power. And in many of the collapsed states, the fragile states, the post-conflict states, they become conflict states because there was an over-centralization, because they couldn't hold the system together from the center. And it's when they dare to decentralize that they actually make themselves less vulnerable. The guys and girls out there will actually be doing a fair share of the dirty work that always tend to come back and bite the central power holders. I mean, to deal with local conflict resolution, to talk to people before it flares up, to make sure that this and that group is involved in the building of a state. And to me, it's absolutely clear that if you manage to have a strong channel of communication between central level and local level, to decentralize power is making the central power holder stronger. In saying that, it's also clear in my mind that power is not like a piece of furniture that you move from central level to local level. It's a very dynamic thing, and you can actually extend power by decentralized power. I see, of course, that central power holders, like a reflex, do not see it this way. But there is massive evidence out there that central power holders lose power by trying to centralize or consolidate the power within their own hands. It just doesn't work beyond a certain point. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We have reached almost the end of today's event, and I can't refrain from making some quick concluding remarks. What I take back from this meeting with me, and first, I would say that I've been dealing with issues of decentralization, participatory development for quite some time in different capacities from different organizations. And what I can say is that in the 90s, you would not have had sitting at this table, for example, our colleague from DPKO involved in a conflict situation and addressing these issues. It would have been another silo, actually, and with very limited communication. So the fact that we have that demand is a sign of how things have changed, in a way what Shabir said. The other element is that in the 90s, all of these issues would have been addressed in a rather technical jargon and way. A lot of the emphasis would have been, in fact, on the design issues, on the technicalities, on the issues of the physical infrastructure or legal infrastructure for decentralization. And today we heard a lot about power dynamics, the relationships between the center and the local level, but also within the local level. And that is also another sign of the change that has taken place. I'm very, in fact, impressed by the comment that you made about the very concept of decentralization and the meaning and the use of that word. I'm a believer in the importance of the context, because, by the way, I'm a social anthropologist by training, Harry. So you can imagine that I'm very I'm in love with that concept. Now, my knowledge of the field is about East Africa and quite different situations like Somalia, Ethiopia, for example. And in Ethiopia, when I was working on the ground, there was a language about decentralization that was used by a highly centralized and centralizing government, a state that retained the power at the center and used, nevertheless, the speak, which was to some extent the speak of donors, but it was also the speak of the regime about a model of development based on an idea of popular participation, which was very organized, very centrally planned, etc. In the transition phase in Ethiopia, the new government used decentralization in a different way, but the meaning was still the old one. And what people understood was the old language, the old meanings, the old concepts, which made a lot of confusion, but in fact, eventually with the change of the constitutional framework in Ethiopia, led also to a different type of devolution, which was based on ethnic federalism. A lot of the concepts about decentralization were used in what is basically a power relationship between different groups, between different areas of the country. On the ground, if I have to say, when I was in Somalia, what was the state? The state was what the state was capable of delivering on the 2-3 basic things that the state could deliver. But they delivered that on health, education, in a way that was highly influenced by those power dynamics. So the state was not necessarily a partner. It was a party in fact, in a conflictual relationship that led then to an escalation. When we talk about the collapse of the state in Somalia, there are areas of Somalia that have never seen the state, basically. So we are talking of something that is just a virtual construction. And your comment on the importance of the, I would say that the cultural construction of the relationship between the state and the citizens is so relevant. It is not only relevant to Africa, it's something that we experience also in our own countries. The country I come from, in southern Italy, one of the key issues that is at the basis of the popular support for criminal or illegal networks is that there is a claim that the state is absent. And what they see, what is delivered that should be delivered by the state, they see it is being delivered by these illegal networks. Now, when it comes to resources, these illegal networks also play a role in mobilizing resources, and we cannot deny that. In the end, it is a hidden resource mobilization that makes a lot of development, maybe, but most likely a lot of appropriation, capture, happen at the central and the local level. Incidentally, yesterday we launched a publication here, Guido, on illicit networks and politics in Latin America, based on 4 case studies. Ecuador, Colombia, Guatemala, and Peru. And they pointed at 3 elements of the crisis of the political system, which is what you mentioned at the beginning, no? The crisis of government in your introduction, as what was conducive to a penetration by criminal networks of local governance. And these were the fragmentation of the political system, the lack of confidence of citizens in the political parties, and then the politicization of local bureaucracy. The fact that new local governments changed the backbone, the human resources based on client-patron relationships, which broke the continuity of public service delivery in many respects. So as long as the state is seen as a party, as something that is separate from the citizen, then it will be seen as a party in a conflict. As you said about South Sudan, it could be seen as something that is patrimonialized, something that is accessed by powerful players at the national level. And even when you have a leader growing from the local to the national, it is inevitable that this leader will be captured by the same gameplay. I think that there is a lot of food for thought here, but things have changed since the 90s. I'm very glad that we can have this conversation here with this wide variety of different actors in the room. It is true that we have to be more concrete and provide recommendations that are valid for policymakers and practitioners, but I think that these two publications actually have set the tone for contributing to that conversation, and I'm looking forward to continuing to do that together with the East-West Center, the ICLD, the UN, and the member states in this context, with having in mind also the important policy debates that we have on the post-2015 development agenda and the peace-building work at the UN. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you.